Poole left the house. Today was his big day. He has been working for a construction company for 2 years, and today he has something like an exam, interviews. Arrived leadership from the capital will see off the retirement of the old director of the branch and, respectively, appoint a new one. There were 3 candidates. All carefully prepared, each required a plan for the development of the company. Poole sat over him for almost a month. Today he was sure that his work was better. He loved his job. Poole has been reading a lot since childhood. It was then that he decided what will be the builder, and it will be necessary to build on the conscience. Nice, like those, that they were building a new house in their yard. Boys often played at the construction site. Once, a slab trembled under Poole's feet. He shouted, tried to hold on, grab onto something, but could not. Fell down from a height of 3 meters. At the bottom, crushed stone was poured and large fragments of concrete lay. Here he fell on them. At first I didn't even lose consciousness, and it didn't hurt. After came fear, because I tried to get up, and then that body pierced by a sharp pain. His friends have already fled to the construction site with adults. Half a year in the hospital, 3 operations. Poole hardly understood what's going on around. He just asked my mom for her to take him. "Mommy, please, I cannot do it anymore, take me home." She just cried and kissed him. Sometimes the Pope showed up, sat by his bed, held his hand, and was silent. Later 6 months he was first allowed to go home for 3 months, but only temporarily. Poole was old enough to understand it. He was 10 at the time. Somehow early in the morning, when parents thought that he was sleeping, Poole heard their conversation in the kitchen. He could not, but Mom always left the door open to hear if the son suddenly calls her. "Rodrigo, what do we do?" 1 month later, surgery, but no money. "Mrs. Parker, but what do you suggest kidney sales?" "Let's look for who we'll sell to." "But you understand what is wrong. Need to come up with something." "Mrs. Parker just needs to reschedule." "Are you crazy? Did you hear what the doctor said every month reduces the chances?" Chair slammed in the kitchen. "We see." Dad jumped up. "Neen, I do everything. What can I do? We have spent all the money. All, understand, them, that were put on the car, and those which have been deferred for repairs. All, understand, but no, you want something more from me. I don't require anything, Rodrigo, I just have this feeling that you don't care. You at least understand that our son may never rise to his feet? Understand. What did you do to get him up? Your accountant's salary is not just small, but none at all. But, Rodrigo. Loud slammed the front door, means father has already left. Poole heard as the mother's footsteps approached the room. He closed his eyes tightly. Let's think that he is sleeping, but tears from closed eyes will not roll. Every day the boy waited that they would take him to the hospital. But as time went, and he understood parents' money was not found, and he will forever remain bedridden. He tried to distract me. Read a lot. So much that my eyes are tired, that my head hurts. But the boy managed to fall asleep quickly. Then, after something happened that divided his life into 2 halves, before betrayal and after. Mother, his mother, human, whom he loved more than anything in the world, just threw it away. All happened early in the morning. Mother went to him in street clothes. She placed her small travel bag on the floor and sat down beside him on the edge of the bed. "How are you, son?" He put down the book, as usual. "And where are you going?" "Son, I need to leave. I came to say goodbye. I want, so that you know, I love you very much, love more than my life. You'll be sure everything will be fine, I promise you." Mrs. Parker kissed Poole quickly and ran out the door. He didn't understand at first that Mom does not need to leave for a day, but for life. She just left him. Dad was there, comforted him, supported, and a week later I found money for the operation. After Poole was able to take the first step, he decided for himself. He no longer has a mother, he has a father who became everything to him. More than a year of rehabilitation and, finally, Poole was able to return to school. Dad again was able to agree to have him take express exams for the past year. Poole did a lot, so he was able to return to his own class. Gone a little time and Dad brought Mrs. Rogers home. Poole did not like her, but he was always very polite to her. How could he be offended by his father or point him out? He went to his car, stopped for a minute. He bought it only 2 weeks ago and he is not tired of admiring it yet. When I got into the car, I saw a young girl on the sidewalk who gazed at him. Poole first thought that this is some friend of his, but after gazing at her, threw out that idea. What is she wearing, long out of fashion? Then no, this is unfamiliar. Machine left, and the girl took a photo out of her pocket. In the photo was Poole, just very small. She sighed contentedly, picked up the bag. Assumed, from the yard she will definitely come back here. But late in the evening, when Poole comes back from work, Poole returned in a great mood. All went just like that, as he thought. From today he is the director of this branch. A bit about who made this. He is only 29. He parked the car and opened the trunk. Took cake and champagne. More from work he called his father and said, to set the table. Heard, truth, as Mrs. Rogers said, I could invite you to a restaurant, but he did not spoil his mood. Might go to a restaurant, but he wants home, with Dad, who was near, who once regretted nothing, to get him out, to put on your feet. Poole, he turned around. Before he was the same morning girl. Close she turned out to be pretty cute. Blue eyes, blonde tail. Maybe B, are still familiar, he going through the options in my head, but there was nothing suitable. Then he gave up. Yes, have we met? No, we don't know each other, God bless. But I need to talk to you. He raised an eyebrow. Young woman was clearly hostile to him. Maybe he met her at Cyril's, his colleagues. They had a great weekend, and, to be honest, Poole does not remember half. Well, what? Let's talk. 5 I can give you minutes. I don't need so much. Here is the address. Where is your mother? She's seriously ill. If you have no desire to help her, then at least come, hence. Maybe you won't be able to meet again. Poole pulled back her hand, which at first mechanically held out for a sheet. I don't have a mother. The girl looked into his eyes. You're wrong. She you have, and no matter how you try to hide from it, she's still not going anywhere. Fine, so be it, but I don't want to see her. Take an address and just think about it, that not everything in life happens that way, how it seems to us. To goodbye, she slipped a piece of paper into his hand and quickly walked away. Evening was spoiled. He and did not know, why didn't you tell your father? Maybe, I just didn't want to spoil his mood. Father didn't deserve it. Gone 2 days, and Poole kept thinking and thinking about the note, which was in the pocket. On Saturday, after another restless night, he nevertheless decided to go and just look into the eyes of that who left him like this. Search took a long time. He circled the streets, which were completely built up with old barracks, and could not find the right house. Then he saw her, that same girl. Has stopped. Hey, how are you there? Young woman turned around and smiled. Arrived. Still I arrived. Just I want to look into her eyes. Show, how to find this house. Here he is, right behind you. Poole turned around and swore. On the house even had a sign with a number, which he stubbornly ignored. Per the old creaky steps the young man climbed to the 2nd floor, reached out his hand, to call and put her down. Mother. He couldn't remember anything bad, only that, how she loved him, crying in bed, how to stroke your hand, while he pretended, what sleeps. Need to get together. This the same woman, who left him, afraid of difficulties. Dad said, that persuaded her to stay, promised to find money, but my mother didn't listen. We see, she already had one, who became dearer to her son. The call rang loudly. Poole noticed that the door was open. He came in and immediately heard a voice. "Mrs. Richardson, it's you?" It was my mother's voice, his mom. Poole stepped forward. "No, this is not Mrs. Richardson, woman, who was lying on the couch," she sighed. "Son, Poole, yes, it's me." She tried to get up, but nothing happened. Poole stood in front of her and couldn't help myself. He didn't want to help her, didn't want to touch her. We hated got it. "Sonny, Etsy, sit down, there is a table." He sat down and looked around. From Poverty looked at him from every corner. Terrible, full. Like everything would be clean, it's just a feeling that he is in some kind of vagabond, did not pass. On some woman swears loudly on the street. Mother smiled slightly. "This the neighbors are rowdy. We are not uncommon." "How you, son?" Poole smiled. "Do not you think, is it a little late to ask such questions?" "Sorry." He was silent, felt that his mother is looking at him. After noticed that there is a child's photograph on the table next to the sofa. Wow, what a hypocrite. Now he finally understood everything. We see, that boyfriend left her a long time ago. Maybe, or maybe, that's why, that she got sick. Somehow how did she know that everything in his life is wonderful and decided to get money? Well, certainly, it explains everything. Why did you seek me out? What do you need? Money. Then you don't need to break a comedy in front of me. Get up, maybe, drink some tea. Mrs. Parker tried to get up again. She even managed to put her feet on the floor, but no more strength. She quietly cried. "Sorry, son," unable to get up. Slammed the door, and Mrs. Richardson appeared in the room. She immediately rushed to Poole's mother. "Mrs. Parker, are you crazy? To you can't stand up." Young woman quickly laid the woman back, and then turned to Poole. "Where are you looking? Why did they let her? Come on you." "Maybe B, did I have to put it down? I figured out your idea. Ken, it was not to invent all this movie, just ask for money." "What?" Mrs. Richardson narrowed her eyes and went to him. "Money? Yes, you will never be able to give that money away. Fluffed up here. To whom you need? Mrs. Richardson, NIS need to. He doesn't know anything." Mrs. Parker was crying. Mrs. Richardson folded her arms across her chest. "It is very comfortable, don't know. Not you know sleep better. Is it true, Poole, all is well with you? Well, get out of here. Mom looked at you and that's enough." Sofa, on which Mrs. Parker lay, heard a sigh. Mrs. Richardson turned around, ran up to her and screamed, "Poole, ambulance. Fast ambulance. Her heart is aching." Poole poked fingers at the phone and did not understand anything. That she really called to look at him before her death, maybe, ask for forgiveness. Ambulance imported Mrs. Parker, and he went for an ambulance, traced, to provide mothers with all the necessary assistance. After asked the doctor, "When I can visit her, tomorrow come back in the afternoon." Work's not very good. Poole left the hospital. I saw Mrs. Richardson right away, who sobbed on a bench near the entrance. He came up, sat down next to. "Well, why are you crying?" "The doctor said that tomorrow you can visit." She raised her wet eyes to him. Exactly. Can I take you home? If not difficult." Poole taxied out of the parking lot of the hospital. Well, what, have to come tomorrow, to give the mother the opportunity to ask for forgiveness and calm down. If she hopes for some kind of relationship, then she is in vain. They drove up to familiar houses. "Where are you going?" Mrs. Richardson, who was silent all the way, said, "I live in the same house as Aunt Mrs. Parker, just in another hallway." "Means, are you neighbors?" She looked at him strangely, then smiled. "This is very strange." Poole was embarrassed. "No, just me. You going to Mom tomorrow?" "Yes, I promised the doctor to come." "Tell, what time you will go?" Poole felt satisfied. It caught fire on him, or something, that she is dressed modestly, but so is the figure, and face everything is with her. O'clock at 3. Fine, I'll come later. Don't think how long you will stay there. Why later? Poole thought that something was wrong. Mrs. Richardson has already gotten out of the car, but before how to close the door, answered, to don't cross with you. Door slammed, and Poole looked at her for some time. Finally, shook off his head. Mrs. Richardson was no longer on the street, we see, she hid in the hallway. He slammed his hands on the steering wheel. Yes, it does not climb into any gate at all. What she allows herself. Same to me, Mother Teresa. He drove the car towards the house. Ian Chest just gurgled anger. Do you need to know how? Mother left him sick, I just didn't want to bother myself, and now, with the help of this petty, she is trying to make him guilty of something. Well, I do not, found fool. They all went. He won't even think about going to the hospital tomorrow, let them disentangle this porridge. Poole was so angry that he did not notice the red traffic light. Squeal brakes, blow and darkness. He couldn't wake up. Or rather he didn't sleep, but still couldn't wake up. Nothing it didn't hurt, around some emptiness, but he understood that here's everything. Only that's why he can't wake up. Steps, light ones, barely audible. Hello. About, yes it's a little bitch. Exactly, Mrs. Richardson. He made an incredible effort and opened his eyes. Mrs. Richardson? And it was she, but immediately disappeared, and a second later the doctor's face appeared. What is your name? Poole. How many are you? 29. Great. The doctor devoted a flashlight to Poole's eyes. He immediately froze. Very fine. Rest. Man disappeared and Mrs. Richardson reappeared. I briefly, only recently yours left. What a nasty aunt your stepmother. How did you live with her? She here put everyone on the ears, give her paper, so that you will not become helpless after the accident. Your father tried to calm her down, but she squealed so, I fall for divorce. I will not live with your disabled person under the same roof. Now I'm surprised, I'm already getting used to it. To what? Well, as soon as something happens to me, everyone throws me away. Now you are talking about Mom? Yes, Mrs. Richardson's eyes sparkled militantly, she suffocated, but then continued, in vain you are so. Although who am I talking to? Thought, why did you hit your head like that the brains fell into place, but no, so they stayed there, where were you? You know, at first I had a better opinion of you, rather than hoping that you would at least try to find out the truth, to understand who was to blame anyway. But you, Mrs. Richardson, couldn't find the right word. All in all, get better. She walked towards the door. Poole looked after her and closed his eyes. Never did not think, what are these people, which in 2 minutes can piss him off? Despite this, he lies here so stuffed with injections. About what does she say all the time? What truth? What he doesn't know is that, which should immediately change his opinion about almost the whole world. Headache. Now he wanted to know that terrible secret, about which Mrs. Richardson constantly spoke. On the other hand, I could tell myself, bad luck for her husband, if there is such a thing. In the evening the doctor came to him. How are you feeling? Yes, it's okay. Well, what can I say? All not so scary to you. Can sit down, get up quietly. A blow hit on the forehead. And your forehead turned out to be strong. Poole sat down. Head spun, but bearable. Dr. Tell, yesterday a woman came to you. Mrs. Parker, most likely, Karpov, but maybe another name. How can I find her? Doctor slapped himself on the forehead. I think, how do I remember you? This you came with her. Yes, I accepted it. She lies in the 7th chamber, branch opposite this. I need to go there. Oh no, it's out of the question. Such no long trips. Let's watch you for the day, another, then travel. Doctor gone. Poole waited another half an hour. The hospital was already quiet. He walked slowly to the door, looking out. And no one in the corridor. Only with sisters wearing funny voices, girls chatting. Poole climbed the wall to the door to the department, opened and went out into the corridor. Rested a little and moved to the door opposite. There was no one in the hallway. I chose the right time. Sick fed, stacked. Now the staff can eat, relax. The 7th ward was right in front of him. Think there was no time. He pulled the door. I's not immediately accustomed to the twilight. When you get used to, he looked at his mother. She lay by the window. 2 beds were empty, and at the other end some woman was sleeping. Poole. We see, felt it, scared, and looked at the bandage on his head. What is it with you, son? Nonsense. Forehead hit. Do you know why I came? She shook her head negatively. You should tell me, why did you leave me? I thought that I don't care about it, but now I understand. What would you like to know? I want to understand who is on your way, that you decided to leave a sick child. She was silent for a minute, then answered, I didn't leave you, Poole. I just had no other choice. Lies. I remember, how did you come to say goodbye to me? No one was forcibly dragged from home. You made that decision yourself. So. Certainly, herself. Me no one forced. Here you go, now just tell me the reason, and I will go. Honestly speaking, Poole was disappointed. Only now he understood, that allowed the idea that after telling his mother he can forgive her. But if not quite, then a little. He wanted to help heal, maybe, and something else. But how to help a person who did so to him? 'Cause it's you. I understand, sick child, it's a burden, but you didn't go into the void. Fine, I will tell you everything, but this is not a short story. I'm not in a hurry. Mrs. Parker sighed, closed her eyes. Your operation has been postponed. I understood that the chance is getting smaller every time. Money was not at all. I tried to take out a loan. I mortgaged an apartment, but everywhere they offered so much that the amount did not cover even half of the costs. Later, 3 months after, how did you get discharged? I started to notice, our dad smells like someone else's perfume. He has lipstick marks on his shirt. And that's when I realized that Rodrigo will not help in any way. He retired himself. He has his own, apart from us, personal life. Act I needed, and as soon as possible. Ainalora looked at his mother in complete disbelief. She didn't say anything. Dad was always there. He found this money, is it true? Poole never asked where. Besides, he remembers it well. After operations, they somehow began to live better. Dad opened his own small business. Yes, he was never at home. Poole, although he was not quite an adult, perfectly understood that father has to work hard. One day, when she continued to somehow run around the banks, I sat on a bench in the park and cried. I heard they called me. I raised her head and saw her friend. Because recent events are so twisted, I haven't seen her for almost a year. She sat down, we talked, how she scolded your dad. She was so angry. On goodbye I said, I'll think too. What if I think of something? I'll call right away. Now I know, can you call it luck? But literally 2 days later, her boss's daughter knocked a man to death. Shot down and fled the scene. Mrs. Rogers, see, that the boss herself is not her own, asked, didn't something happen? They had a good relationship and she told everything. Together they came up with how to solve a problem. She called me at night and said that her boss is ready to pay twice as much. How much for surgery? Time to think. Father was not at home. Mrs. Rogers spoke that the rest of the money can be spent on the best lawyer, which will shorten your time. Yes, they offered me to take the blame for my daughter on myself. I agreed. Understood, I won't see you for a very long time. But you can run, like before. Dad showed up just before morning. I told him everything. He supported me, said that he would do everything to give me as little as possible. He couldn't come to court because he was with you in the hospital. Mrs. Rogers did not come either. But I knew for sure that they were already helping you, and I thought that the case would be reconsidered. Then they gave me 9 years. I don't know why there are so many. They found something else there, or maybe the person who died was a difficult mortal. As you understand, there was no review of the case. No lawyers, nothing. I couldn't tell the truth. It would only get worse. The money is paid and the operation is done for you. That woman kept her promise. I was released after 7 years. I immediately went to our house. I so wanted to see you, but Mrs. Rogers opened the door for me. Can't be. She, Mrs. Rogers, is she? Unfortunately, yes. It was she who insisted on leaving everything as it is. It was to her that our dad ran at night. I do not blame him. Not everyone can stand what we had at home then. A puzzle formed in Poole's head: money, a better life, Mrs. Rogers. Everything is so simple. Only now he always thought that everything was even simpler. I left. Mrs. Rogers explained to me that you hate me, and your father loves her. You have a family, and I. Nobody needs me anymore. Took off this apartment in the barracks. She is cheap. Got a job at the factory. I often came to the house, then to the institute. Watched behind you from the side, cried, admired. You grew up to be a handsome man, smart, and I'm very proud of you. I would never bother you, but Mrs. Richardson. Once upon a time I had the impudence to tell her everything. Mrs. Richardson burned with indignation all this time. And when I got sick, she decided to find you. I was against it, but she is stubborn. Yes, that's for sure. Sometime Poole was silent, digesting information, getting used to it. Why didn't you come to me earlier? Why didn't she tell me? But if I didn't listen, I would write a letter. But Mrs. Parker was silent. He squeezed out of himself, "Ma'am, do you hear?" Again silence. Poole threw herself on the bed. Hand Mrs. Parker hung limply, cheeks wet with tears, eyes closed and white, even blue lips. Mother. He touched her, and the other hand slipped too. Poole grabbed his mother by the shoulders. Mother, Mommy, just not now, please. He was shaking her and screaming. Tears rolled out of my eyes. Head Mrs. Parker dangled on the pillow. Mother. Someone pulled me off the bed. After he felt a prick in his shoulder. And darkness. He was not in a hotel. He wanted to be there, next to Mom. He woke up in my room. A nearby father sat with him. Poole looked at him and simply did not understand how he lived. Why is it possible to live life without hatred? He hated my mother so much, and now it turns out he needs to hate his father. Pope. Rodrigan, startled, opened my eyes. Son. Pope, is this all true? All, what my mother told me. Rodrigan looked into the eyes of his son. Yes, Poole, complete truth. Sorry, it happened. I understand. Maybe, you don't want to see me and you know everything is right. I bought a ticket for my sister. Her husband died. It's hard for her to live there alone with 2 kids. All left you, find documents at home. Mrs. Rogers went to a more fortunate place. Goodbye, son, and I'm sorry, if you can. Father headed for the door. He seemed to be waiting for Poole to call him. Very waited, Poole restrained himself. Son, what are you running? You are married today, and you act like a kid. Mrs. Parker looked at her son with a smile, who was wearing a tie. Then I took off and put on a bow tie. She just returned from Germany 2 months ago, where she underwent complex heart surgery. To pay for it, Poole sold his father's business as soon as I found out that the operation was possible. Mrs. Parker answered. Poole was adamant. This money belongs to you. Mrs. Parker was difficult to recognize. She seems to have thrown off 20 years. Ma'am, well, how not to worry, it's like you don't know Mrs. Richardson. She now changes his mind 18 times and runs away. Mrs. Parker laughed. Not change his mind, she loves you. Ma'am, truth? Do you really think so? He sat next to his mother on the sofa, and she hugged him. Well, of course, it seems to me at all that she fell in love with you when I saw it for the first time. Only, run, don't betray me, and then I get. They laughed. Here you go, now they have a family and even shared secrets.